all the corruption, everybody's really, if you've been watching TV at all and listened to Congress, you're aware of all the corruption up there. And I think they're allowed to do what they do, spend money and put us in $14 trillion of debt. The only way they're able to do that is by the Federal Reserve Bank paying the debt and financing it. So if we're ever going to have a healthcare system and a government that's not corrupt, we need to get rid of the Federal Reserve banking system. Otherwise, nothing's ever going to stay fixed. So God bless you and thank you very much.
Thank you, Randy. Well, it is good to know that that health care bill, if I'm going to be attacked by a flag, I want it to be a Texas flag. It is good to know that health care bill will create some jobs. I mean, we now all have the privilege of paying for 17,000 IRS agents. I know y'all are excited about that one. All right, our next speaker is Kevin Grace. Kevin describes himself as a, quote, reformed liberal, celebrating over 15 years of mental sobriety. He has been a resident of Marshall, Texas since 1982, an employee of General Motors in Shreveport, Louisiana since 1985. Kevin graduated from East Texas Baptist University with the Bachelor of Science in Education and from Stephen F. Austin with the Master of Business Administration. Kevin?
Wow. Nobody spit on me and nobody called me a racial epithet. Did the haters get the notice to this meeting? I credit two things to my political conversion, and the first one is having the honor and the privilege to live among and fellowship with people such as yourself. I was born and raised in the liberal East Coast, and when I got out of high school, this was 1980, unemployment was over 10%. So I had an opportunity to come to Texas, and I thought I'd go there to see. I think that flag saw a Yankee somewhere. I came down here when I was 19 years old. I was married, I had a little girl, and you all opened up your hearts and took me into your community. And today, 28 years later, I have a wonderful wife, a house twice as big as the one I was born and raised in. I got 3 daughters and 6 grandchildren. And everything that means the most to me, I owe to Texas and to you fine people. And I just wanted to take that opportunity to thank you all. That was only one half of my political conversion. The other half, nothing will make you a conservative more than having to depend on a bunch of liberals for your financial security. And I am an employee of General Motors, and they are run by one of the most liberal organizations in this country, the United Auto Workers. And that's the message I wanted to bring you all today. I know unions have a bad name, and rightfully so, but it wasn't always that way. And the story of labor in this country really parallels to the debate we're having today. This debate of limited government versus a government that provides everything for everyone, it was fought back then too. Prior to the 1900s, there were very few federal regulations in this country. And because of that, businesses grew, prospered. We entered an industrial age. And the labor unions at that time were a free market response to this accumulation of capital and wealth. Labors were voluntary, and just by joining together behind causes and getting the community support behind you, they were able to raise their wages and keep the middle class in this country as strong as it ever was. The only thing the labor unions had to depend on back at that time was a government that ensured you were free to assemble with like-minded people and free to make your economic decisions on your own. And that gave us a very strong middle class. And with this freedom and prosperity, however, it also brought a lot of immigration to this country, cheap labor, and also with it a philosophy called Marxism. And that was the challenge of the labor unions at that time. Samuel Gompers was the first president of the American Federation of Labor. That's the AFL of the today AFL-CIO. And the socialists and the Marxists at that time were trying to take over the unions. And they would say that, well, we need to get the workers to become politically involved and change some of these rules. And Samuel Gompers said he wanted to keep them undefiled and free from alliances with any political party. Factions that wish to dally with hobbies and fine-spun theories have no place in the ranks of unionism. And then when the socialists and their unions tried to pass legislation that would favor labor, Samuel Gompers said, "We want a minimum wage established, but we want it established by the solidarity of the working men themselves rather than by any legal enactment. We must not depend on legislative enactments to set wage standards. When we encourage such a system, it is equivalent to admitting our own incompetence and our inability to self-govern." But the socialists wouldn't stop, and they would go parading around the country talking about all the terrible conditions in the in industry. And Gompers came back and said, "We recognize the poverty. We know the sweatshops. We can play on every string of the harp and touch the tenderest chords of human sympathy. The worst crime against working people is a company which fails to operate at a profit. Our socialist friends would look forward to the promised land and wait for the sweet by and by. Their statements as to our economic ills are right. Their conclusions and their philosophy are all askew." And then when the socialists tried to take over the union, Gompers confronted them at the AFL convention, and he fronted them out. He said, "I want to tell you, socialists, that I have studied your philosophy, studied your standard works, both in English and in German. I have heard your orators and watched your movement the world over. I have been closely associated with many of you, and I know how you think, and I know what you propose. And I also know what you have up your sleeve. And I want to say I am entirely at variance with your philosophy. Economically, you are unsound. Morally, you are wrong. And industrially, you are an impossibility." Unfortunately, Samuel Gompers died in the 20s. And then we went into the Great Depression, and amid 20% unemployment, a financial collapse, and many people going hungry, the Marxists then were able to exact the kind of government that they wanted under FDR. Never let a crisis go to waste, right? So Franklin Roosevelt signed the Labor Relations Act of 1935, and for the first time in our history, the federal government regulated unions. They forced companies to negotiate with unions, and they forced the workers to live under union contracts. That was followed by the Fair Labor Act of 1938, which established the minimum wage. By getting the labor unions behind them, they also gained support for Social Security, Fannie Mae, and a total new regulation system in this country.